Hello, I'd now like to talk a bit about the case study at Savernake Forest, where we have been doing work with Forestry England for a number of years now. Firstly, let me explain what Savernake is and where it is. It's a very large block of ancient woodland just in North Wiltshire and south of Marlborough, and it's reckoned to be one of the oldest forests in the UK, with records dating back to 900 AD. It was a hunting forest for many years, and Henry VIII has been known to be one of the people who used it. Today it's privately owned by the Earl of Cardigan, and Forestry England has leased it, 3,500 acres of the forest, to produce timber. But the forest is also a designated SSSI for its lichen community and important plant area. So plant life has had an interest in its long-term management. And to do that, lichen surveys have been carried out in order to try to establish where the most demanding and specialist or rarest lichen happen to be in the forest. And this has covered the whole of the 3,500 acres. And this work was then followed up with an ancient tree survey, which, in order to try to match up where the fungi were on while the lichen were on those individual trees, those trees were recorded on GPS, and the surrounding environment and their condition was also noted, so that management recommendations could be passed back to Forestry England. And 4,500 trees were recorded, living trees, as well as 400 dead, standing and dead trees. Within Savernake Forest, we've got a number of target species, and these include barberstool nocturnal bat, the lesser spotted woodpecker that has been recorded there, and I've seen a number in the past, and the oak polypore. We think that Hericium arenaceus was also recorded there in the past, and this is one that we are trying to reintroduce. Other target species including a lichen called Basidio incompta, and it's called the sap groove lichen because it likes the nutrient runs and wound tracks on trees on a more basic bark, such as horse chestnut and field maple. And then there are a number of other lichen which are equally rare and demanding, and they need open grown trees with light to the bark. And the issues that we found while doing the work at Savernake is very much the change of land use and the change of management in the forestry that has introduced many shading trees, such as conifer and beech. They're faster growing than the ancient trees, which have been rather enclosed and enveloped by these trees. And the lack of light has meant that the trees have suffered. They've suffered from stress, and they've also become overgrown from the base, where the lack of grazing has meant that understories such as bramble have grown up to 3 or 4 meters above the stem. The continuity of habitat is an important factor because over the years many trees have been felled, and a lot of those would have become ancient trees and been a generational bridge between the very ancient trees and the younger ones. But because a lot of them have been removed, it's important to try to identify recruit trees that have a suitable architecture and manage so that they become ancient and veteran. Habitat fragmentation and the loss of that habitat is also a factor around the outside of Savernake Forest, where there's a large arable piece of land which has rather isolated much of the forest from other woodland, and it's also potential development has gone on, which is meaning that that land is being lost that was originally grassland and was probably good habitat adjacent to the forest. The demanding lichen species, they need very old bark, corky bark, neutral, base rich, and it needs to be open to the light, and this is where these specialist lichen are found. Within the forest there are some missing components. We certainly want to see more recruit ancient trees, and those aren't the straight ones growing up like lollipops. They're the crooked ones and the ones that are leaning. and we need standing and fallen deadwood to be retained, which is being done, and it's an important factor to ensure that that element of the forest continues to gradually evolve over time, and that there's always plenty of decaying wood. And the other component is having an adequate nectar source. Hawthorn trees are particularly good for this, but also umbellifers and other shrubby plants. So it's important to try to make sure that they are not removed as scrub management, but retained. And the fungi which are within the woodlands are an important factor, as I mentioned earlier, so we need to make sure that we understand better their colonies and that their conditions are right, and that heartwood is freely available to them all the time. Some of the other work that we've done to address these issues of concern is to try to retain certainly the trees that have got the demanding lichen on them, increasing the amount of light that might be around them, but also pollarding nearby trees to increase light levels and also create the right habitat for those lichen to move on to. But many of the elm trees was the favoured tree that the Basidia incompta preferred, but it's now jumped to the field maple, so it's now serving as a very important alternative. And in other places, veteranizing of trees has been done where the stem has been wounded, cavities have been created in order to introduce decay sooner into younger trees. Inoculation of fungi has also been done, as mentioned earlier, to introduce the decay to beech trees, and invertebrate surveys have been carried out using vane traps, and all the work has been recorded on GPS so that there's a long-term record of exactly what and where these species are found. We've also carried out bat surveys using audio moth detectors, and we found a good range of bats travelling through the central part of the forest where most ancient trees are, and they also seem to be doing very well around some of the trees that have been haloed. We've looked for the oak polypore, and we were successful in finding it on at least one tree. We want to try and find more. You can see how difficult it is to identify these, because the one on the left is oak polypore, and the one on the fungi on the right, growing in very much a similar situation, is chicken of the woods, as it's just started to grow. So it's not always easy to identify them easily. And as time goes on, building resilience into the forest is key to ensure that this ancient forest, which is a very, very specialist environment, is maintained in the long term and that appropriate management is implemented. So it's good that Forestry England are taking this on board and have recently done a much halo working, as well as introducing grazing back into much of the forest, which is all welcome news. So thank you very much for listening, and if you have a chance to go to Savernake, it's certainly well worth a visit.